You're gonna need a bigger boat. So serious.
I am Iron Man.
This is a tasty burger.
Welcome to the In Session Film Podcast.
Oh, welcome to this podcast review for October 12th, 2025, and I'm JD Duran.
And I'm Brendan Cassidy.
Hey, thanks for joining us, everybody, as we record this episode from the roof of a Toys R Us.
Oh,
Should
I miss
be really
those.
Fun.
I miss those Toys R Us stores, those big Toys R Us stores. We had one very close to where I grew up, and as a kid, we went there all the time, almost every weekend.
Yeah, I didn't really grow up with Toys R Us around me. I grew up in a small town in Michigan, so we would have had to drive a certain amount of a distance, about an hour, to get to the nearest Toys R Us.
That's quite a bit.
So
of
when we
distance.
did go, it was quite the occasion. So that's where the store holds a little bit of a special place in my heart. So I wasn't there a lot, but it was an event when we did go. So you do remember it.
Apparently the business is doing pretty well nowadays. I think a lot of their flagship stores have been doing well, especially given their small stores within, shopping malls and like Macy's and things like that. They're starting to add more flagship stores. So perfect timing for a movie like this that is essentially functioning as Toys R Us propaganda in a way.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Yeah. There's a lot of, I guess you could call it product placement. However, this film is, of course, inspired by a real story that took place in the late 90s with Jeffrey Manchester, who hid in a toy store, a Toys R Us, for months on end, hiding from the authorities. Crazy. I had never heard of this story before. Were you familiar with this?
No, I didn't either. I think I may have heard some rumblings about it when he was finally caught in, what was that, in 2005? I think he was caught for the second time after they found him hiding in that Toys R Us. And this is a man that became most known as a robber of small establishments like McDonald's and fast food restaurants and things like that. And he got called the Roofman because he went through the roof. And he was also known and popular primarily because of his politeness. I think that was one of his trademark things that the news always talked about, which made him kind of an interesting celebrity of sorts at that time, because that wasn't really talked about. I feel like you had criminals, and then you had people that kind of drew the line a little bit. And I think this is a movie that's definitely playing with that latter half there.
Oh, the film certainly does play with that duality. There's no doubt about it. I was not familiar with any of that or this story or how it would end. But I do think, I guess to your point, what I love about the credits of this film, where it shows us so much of that archival footage of people being interviewed, talking about their interactions with Jeffrey Manchester and how that duality is emphasized, because they're ultimately talking to the news because he robbed them, put him in a freezer or whatever the case may be. And they're like, oh yeah, he's the nicest guy I've ever met.
He gave me his coat so I wouldn't be cold.
Absolutely insane.
I was weirdly reminded of, and I don't think this movie is similar to this comparison I'm about to make. I'm more so talking about the general stories and the true stories of them. But this movie weirdly reminded me of The Old Man and the Gun, the Robert Redford film.
Sure, yeah.
They are relatively similar as far as the showcasing the politeness of this crew.
Yeah, for sure. Very different stylistically, but I can certainly see the comparisons from that perspective. This film premiered at the Toronto International Film Festival about a month ago, a little more than a month ago, is now in theaters. This is the first film from Derek Cianfrance since 2016. It had been almost 10 years since The Light Between Oceans.
Yeah. He did direct a miniseries in between that, though, which I didn't see. It was with Mark Ruffalo, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
And I did hear good things about that.
Yeah, I'm sure it was good. I guess that's a good transition to what I wanted to ask you. What do you think about him as a filmmaker? Obviously, he only has a handful of films to this point, but where do you stand with Derek Cianfrance?
I really like his first two films. Those two being Blue Valentine and The Place Beyond the Pines. I actually think he is one of the at least given those two films, he is one of those directors that I actually think handles really oppressive emotionality in a way that I actually kind of like, where it doesn't seem too heavy-handed to the point that it's just desperately trying to wring an emotion out of you. I actually think he is pretty good at that. I found those movies to be surprisingly tender and delicate despite how heavy that they ultimately are. The Light Between Oceans kind of felt like maybe an attempt to almost commercialize that style of his, and I don't hate that movie. I actually think that movie does have some uh, uh, positive merits to talk about, especially given its performances, but it's definitely a flawed effort when compared to those other two films, I think. But I think those first two films of his are quite good.
Yeah, I pretty much agree with a lot of what you're saying. I think Blue Valentine and The Place Beyond the Pines are really, really good.
Mhm.
I enjoyed those films immensely. The Light Between Oceans, I do have very different reactions to that film depending on the perspective
Sure.
that I'm looking at it. I think looking at it from a more objective, critical perspective, it's it has its flaws. It's very
Yeah.
uneven. The writing isn't as cohesive as it could have been. It's a little bit stilted.
Hmm.
I do think subjectively I enjoy that film way more just on a personal level. And maybe
Hmm.
it's just the Fassbender Vikander of it all
Sure.
that I
The-
really
I mean,
love. I think the score to that film is also pretty good. So I do have a subjective allure with The Light Between Oceans, even though I recognize that it's quite flawed, especially from a writing perspective. But
mhm.
overall, I really like Derek Cianfrance as a filmmaker, especially when we're just looking at his eye as a director and his ability to tell a story. I think that comes through quite well in his previous three movies.
Mhm.
It's kind of wild, and maybe it's a financial thing. I don't know that he just hasn't made a movie in almost 10 years. Again, I know he did the miniseries, and I don't know what was all involved there.
Mhm.
But wouldn't surprise me if that was a very good miniseries. I have
I've
no
heard
doubt
great
about that.
things about it. Yeah, I think it's on
Yeah,
HBO, if I'm not mistaken. I think it was one of those. I think that's the. Isn't that the one where Mark Ruffalo plays two characters?
no idea. Haven't seen it.
I want to fact check myself on that one.
You might be
I
right.
haven't seen it, but I've heard really good things about it.
According to this, he plays Dominic and Thomas Birdsey.
I
So you're
know this
probably
much
right
is
about that.
true. That's what it is. Okay. Well,
Yep.
as far as what Derek Cianfrance was involved with, he didn't direct Sound of Metal, but he was very key in getting
Yeah.
that movie made. He was an
Yep.
executive producer on it. And I think at one point he was originally tapped to direct that movie, if I'm not
Yes.
mistaken. He ended up not directing it though, but he was involved with that. And
Yeah.
honestly, a movie like Sound of Metal, which I still think is an amazing movie, you can actually sense a lot of Derek Cianfrance in that movie when you watch it in
Mm.
conjunction with something like Blue Valentine and The Place Beyond the
Yep.
Pines. They're actually kind of similar,
Hmm.
aesthetically and emotionally.
Yeah, I agree. Could definitely see that as a Derek Cianfrance movie for sure. You
Yeah.
definitely feel his influence there for sure.
Hmm.
I do agree. So he was an executive producer on that film. Did direct. I know this much is true. That was in 2020. Five
Okay.
years later, he is now here with Roofman. So, with that, let's go ahead and transition into this film. It is, of course, written and directed by Derek Cianfrance. It stars the wonderful Channing Tatum, Kirsten Dunst, Ben Mendelsohn, Lakeith Stanfield, Juno Temple, and others. Peter Dinklage, got to mention here as well,
Hmm.
and a bunch of others that come and go throughout the film. If you're not familiar with Roofman, a charismatic criminal, while on the run from the police, hides in a hidden space of a toy store. There, he adopts a new identity and becomes involved with an employee, beginning a relationship as unlikely as it is risky. All right, Brendan, what do you think about Roofman?
It's a fascinating story, and if they made a documentary on this story, I would want to see that in a heartbeat. It's a very different type of film for Derek Cianfrance as well. When you think about movies like Blue Valentine and
Oh,
The
yeah.
Place Beyond the Pines specifically, this is a much zanier movie in a way. It has a stronger comedic energy. At least it's going for that. Uh, I'm kind of struggling with this one, and maybe I'll be able to find my words as we continue this conversation, because I did enjoy myself with this movie. I really don't think it's Derek Cianfrance as a director as to why I enjoyed myself. I actually don't know if he was the right director for this type of material. He's very much tapping into a much zanier energy, like I mentioned, but he's still holding on to his trademark dramatic urges. And there's kind of this fusion happening between the two. And I don't know if that fusion really works here. At times, I think he might actually be a bit of a miscast director. But man, this is a perfect example once again of how great casting and great performances can ultimately really make your movie. And we've seen that a lot this year. I feel like that's been kind of a theme for me is how many movies I wonder if they would have worked as movies if not for certain performances. Because Channing Tatum's terrific here and Kirsten Dunst is terrific here. Their chemistry is amazing. Whenever they're on screen together, this movie absolutely takes off. And I really wonder if it weren't for them, I don't know if this movie would have worked as well for me. I kept thinking that maybe this needed a different type of energy given this type of zany material. But when it does work, dramatically speaking, it's really because of how great these performances are. I really do think they are that good here, and they make it for me. They really do, and that's ultimately why I ended up enjoying myself. I can't sit here and say I dislike the movie because I didn't, but they really did save this thing in a lot of ways for me.
I love this movie. I
Wow,
love it a lot.
okay.
I think
Okay.
this is a really, really good movie. You are right, though. It's quite the departure for Derek Cianfrance, sort of. I do push back against your description of its zany qualities. It certainly has that appeal for sure. But what I love about Derek Cianfrance and why I love that he is at the helm here is that he doesn't allow this film to become oversaturated with that zaniness. He pulls that rug exactly when it's needed, and those tender qualities that he is known for come through so palpably and so vividly at the exact right times. And that's what I love about this film. For all of its fun and charming and quirky qualities, it is equally interested in that duality we mentioned earlier, as far as Jeffrey being this nice, loving guy, but someone that had to rely on dubious practices to make a life for himself. That is at the nucleus of this film. It's what defines Jeffrey, and Channing Tatum, to your point, is really, really great at tapping into that in his performance. I think maybe what's so incredible about the marriage of writing and directing here, as far as Cianfrance on the page, what he does with Jeffrey and Tatum's performance there, that combination is maybe at its most fascinating, at least for me, when
Okay.
you're looking at the identity of Jeff and who he really is. And what we see in this film is that first and foremost, he's a family man. There's one moment in the film where Steve, the Lakeith Stanfield character, says that he's a terrible criminal because he doesn't have that cold streak that the best criminals possess, which, as we come to see, is very true. Jeff is a complicated man whose identity revolves around loving his kids and his family. He can't just walk away and start a new life. It's not who he is. Something I find compelling about the role that Lee, the Kirsten Dunst character, that she and her kids play here, because there's an argument to be made that they are just filling a void in Jeffrey. He can't see his daughter, the one that he had with his wife/girlfriend, whatever that relationship was.
Yeah, that
Once
first
he
relationship
escapes
there.
from prison, he can't see his daughter and two sons, not without risking his freedom. So instead, he creates this makeshift family where he can fulfill that void of having someone to take care of and buy things for. I don't think it's selfish. He is genuinely caring for Lee and her daughters, but I think simultaneously they do remedy this empty feeling that he has. And how the film goes about demonstrating that, again, at times in a very funny, charming way. And there are many examples that we could bring up in
Yeah.
this conversation, but at the right times, that zaniness evaporates for a real humanity that I think gives incredible credence to the choices he makes at the end of this film that I absolutely want to talk about as well.
Okay.
So I love the humor. I love those sensibilities. And maybe that's Tatum more than Cianfrance. But when the Cianfrance comes through here and you get those tender moments, which again, Tatum and Dunst are able to tap into incredible in their own right. But the marriage of writing and directing here, I think, is quite notable.
Yeah, and I'm glad you're bringing that up, and I'm glad you sensed it in that way and gave credit where credit was due to Derek Cianfrance. And I think, if anything, if I have to give him credit as a director, he is certainly a director that's really good with actors. So if I'm praising these performances and how they ultimately gave me what I needed from this, perhaps a lot of credit has to go to Derek Cianfrance and how he directs his performers and how he gets what he needs to out of them. I just wonder, and I'm still wondering about this, if the film's zaniness and the typical Derek Cianfrance tonal choices that we know him for, I kind of think without these performances, these two attributes kind of nullify themselves. And I think these performances are really the thing that's emphasizing those qualities more so than Cianfrance doing that work. And that's why I said, if it weren't for these actors and if this were casted any differently and the performances were not up to par, I don't know if this movie would have worked as well for me. I think, if anything, maybe it did need a little bit more of that zany energy that maybe I would have needed from something like this, especially to capitalize on the ridiculousness of this story and that it is, in fact, a true story. But I will, to your point, give Cianfrance credit because clearly he knows how to work with actors. That has been evident in all of his movies. It's why a movie like Blue Valentine was an Oscar-nominated movie for Michelle Williams, if I'm not mistaken, wasn't it? So he knows how to capture the right emotional sides of these people when they are complex, and the complexity is definitely there. A lot of that really is thanks to Tatum, Kirsten Dunst, and even Lakeith Stanfield. I think is quite good here too. I think they really do bring what this movie needs. I'm still wondering if the tonal choices from Derek Cianfrance kind of nullify themselves. And I don't know if it's the movie serving the performances or if it's really more so the performances serving the movie. And I kind of think it's more the latter for me.
Okay. I'll be perfectly honest. I'm not exactly sure if I understand what you mean by nullify themselves, but I will say I do think the comedy here is effective. I think the film does take advantage of establishing how silly this premise is, despite it obviously being a recreation of something that really did take place, which is part of the allure and the charm here. And we see that very early on when he first gets to the Toys R Us and he's having to escape from the cameras. He figures out how to turn the cameras off. He finds a place to hide. He's going through the store and stealing all of these items. He's creating his own little makeshift hideout, which I certainly want to talk about here in a minute as well. So I think there's a lot of goofiness there. Once he gets involved with the church, and there's some awkwardness with how he's having to integrate himself into this community, despite him not wanting to initially, simply for the risk of someone recognizing who he is. And then he's able to create this new character of sorts that allows for him to be himself in this way that also brings some fun charm to his interactions with Lee and the two daughters. So there's certainly plenty of divertingness to this film for sure. But I also think that at the right time, and I think what I love about Cianfrance here is that he injects those tender qualities when it's needed. When Jeff finds himself at this crossroads of, if I continue this, the risk becomes too high and I will be caught again. And I need to be on the move. And so he starts to contemplate that. He takes steps toward making that a reality. And as those complications arise, that tenderness, those human complications in the character start to bubble themselves a little bit more, which certainly come through wonderfully in Tatum's performance. I do agree. So those tonal swings to me, I think, are most likely indicative of how someone listening to this story, how they would perceive it, and also getting to the humanity that would come through when someone like Jeff, how he's described to be and how he's portrayed here, again, on the page and in Tatum's performance. I think that duality is quite striking. The film isn't overly sentimental by any stretch of the imagination, but I do love that it also, for the lack of a better term, somewhat pulls its punches. It comedically, it doesn't become overly zany to the point where it's just this slapstick comedy. I'm glad it didn't go down that road either. It wants to be in the middle where it gives empathy to Jeff and understanding of the struggles that he was experiencing while also not excusing him and putting him in a position where he is having to make these dubious choices. I think they get that. They thread that needle quite perfectly.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if it does. The introspective side of what you're talking about with regard to how these characters deal with these situations, especially in the back half of the movie, I do think that's where the movie is at its strongest. And maybe it's just me, but some of those zany qualities and how diverting that they seem to be in that first half, I could have used them. I could have used a more heightened sense of zaniness in some of those, and maybe that's what it is. Like some of those sequences of Jeff roaming around Toys R Us, kind of going through some of these comedic situations, I found some of that kind of tiring a little bit. And maybe I needed more of a filmmaker's touch to add a bit more of a zany quality and capitalizing on the ridiculousness a little bit. And maybe that's where I feel like the nullification that I mentioned earlier is coming from. And how Derek Cianfrance is just not really much of a stylish director, which is perfectly fine. I like that from him and how he's able to utilize that in his past movies. I just wonder if this is a movie that needed a little bit more oomph in that department. I kept thinking that maybe someone like a Steven Soderbergh would have been perfect for this type of material and capitalizing on both ends and still finding a way to fuse those together. And that's why I'm just not quite sure if Cianfrance was quite the guy. But like I said, in the back half and everything you're talking about there, I do absolutely agree with you. I think when he focuses on these character exchanges and the moralities of all of this, that is where the movie is at its most effective. Like Cianfrance is really good at crafting a domestic drama. And when this movie functions as a domestic drama primarily, which is more often than not, this primarily does fall into that category, it is more effective. Like I think those sequences ultimately work. I guess maybe just personally, and that just could just be a subjective thing. I think I needed a little bit more of a heightened quality in those zany, diverting aspects of the movie.
Yeah, I will disagree with that. At least given what I think his strengths are, not to say that he couldn't pull that off, but the more you go to the extremes, the more finding that middle becomes challenging. Maybe he's a director that could do that. I don't even know if Soderbergh would have been able to achieve those kinds of extremes and then get to the middle. But I also don't believe Soderbergh would have gotten to the places at the end of this film that this film goes. I think he would have taken a different approach. But again, that's what I love about Soderbergh. He's just a very different director and storyteller than Derek Cianfrance. So I don't see them necessarily apples to apples in that regard. But given what I know and love about Derek Cianfrance, and I do think the tender humanistic qualities that we get at the end of this film are important to this story. I think they're crucial. In fact, so much of the nuance lies in examining that here and never foregoing that. That would have been a huge problem, I think, for this film if it had done that. And the more you heighten the comedy, the more you get away from that middle ground that it ultimately gets to. And not to say he couldn't have done it. I don't know, but you certainly pose a much bigger hurdle. And I don't know, that could also just be a subjective thing from you and I.
Maybe.
I don't necessarily love heightened comedy because it gets a little bit too awkward unless the world building is meant to be overly zany. But most of the time, those movies aren't trying to go for the nuances that this film is emotionally. So I don't think that would have worked for me here. I like that he pulls the rug when he does. I think it, again, and because the film is still quite diverting in these really incredibly charming ways. In fact, one of my favorite elements of this film is how Jeffrey is this kid at heart. that's a lot of his personality, despite
I did like
his
that. Yeah.
appearance, despite the irony that he's this prisoner, this who's in prison for armed robbery. So like you hear about some of the things that he's done, and with Tatum in the role, I don't know what the real Jeffrey looks like, but with Tatum in the role, he does have a little bit of an imposing physique, which the film does subvert and undermine in some of its humor later on, which I do appreciate. But I do love that in a lot of ways, he's just this kid at heart. So what we see in the Toys R Us, which that alone, him hiding out in a Toys R Us is almost too perfect of a hideout. But I love the way he personalizes his space, because it's reminiscent of a 7-year-old. The way that he personalizes, and I get that he's in a Toys R Us, so his options are limited, but I do love that he doesn't hold back. So when we do get to see his space, you have this big stuffed animal. He has a Kobe poster on his wall. He has Spider-Man sheets. And it's just something that he fully embraces. And when you couple that with the choices that he makes throughout this film, it makes so much sense of why he loves to play with kids, which is something that we see early on with his own daughter. We see it later on with Lee's daughters as well. He loves kids, and he talks about this several different times throughout the film as well. So we see it in action, we see it verbally, and I love how that is ultimately rendered in this film. And that's a combination of Cianfrance and his storytelling and Tatum's performance as well, and how he taps into that. And again, you couple that with the ironies of the positions that he's in. And I love how this film gets to that again, that central duality of he is a good guy. He is a nice guy. He's a family man. He's a kid at heart, despite these really terrible choices that he makes along the way. I do think that comes through quite vibrantly in the storytelling.
There is something kind of meta about casting Channing Tatum in a role like this.
Tatum, he's kind of perfect for that. Yeah,
He kind of is, because, and I don't know about you, maybe I'm just speaking for myself, but for a man like Channing Tatum, who's, how old is he now? He's 45, I think, maybe 44. He's in his mid 40s. Simple as that. I think he was born in 1980. He still kind of seems like a child in a way. Like when I see him, I still see a very young man, right?
He's also a child at heart for sure. Yeah,
well, I think that's part of it. And well, just given the kind of movies that he has been in, he's known for being kind of immature, right? That's kind of one of his shticks. When you think of many of his roles in the late 2000s into the 2010s, whether it be the Jump Street movies, the Magic Mike movies, there's a childish nature to just Channing Tatum in real life, I feel like. And that kind of makes his casting here almost symbolic. And he plays with that as if he knows that it's meant to be kind of a metaphorical gesture in a way. And I think that's why he's so perfect here, and why I did ultimately love his performance. It is actually one of his better performances. I have to look at his filmography. I don't know if it's his best performance that he's ever given, but it's certainly up there.
I think you can make the argument for sure.
I might say, I don't know, maybe I might say Magic Mike XXL, but I'm biased because I love that particular movie so much. But I do think this is maybe top 3 at the very least.
Yeah, it's certainly up there. Yeah. I haven't done any sort of ranking of his performances, but I think you can very much make the argument. He's excellent here. He's really good. And I think outside of that playfulness, again, that idea of being a kid at heart, which is so perfect for Jeffrey and who he is here. But another reason I think that's impeccable, whether you're looking at it from Tatum's performance, the writing and directing here, the casting of Tatum, all of that, because ultimately one of my favorite things about this film, the idea that resonated the most for me, and this is where we're getting sort of into spoilers. And I say sort of because if you know this story and you know where it ends, spoiler alert, but it's a real story. You kind of know where this goes. At least if you know the story, you know where this is going to end. But slight spoilers here for the ending of Roofman. But what I love about this film, what I love about Jeffrey and everything we've already talked about and how the film sets him up, is it gets to this idea about the cost of freedom. Because there's a point in this film where Jeffrey absolutely has a way out, unequivocally, has a way out. And he did some pretty awful things to ensure that he had his way out. He had some help along the way, obviously.
Yeah.
But one moment that we see in this film is he sets this dentist office on fire, which is kind of funny in a way.
Fire.
Yeah. Kind of a funny moment. And again, it's one of those, are they heightening the story? Or are they over dramatizing it? And then you get to that end credits and they interview the dentist whose office was actually set on fire. So it's like, oh, that actually did happen. It's just,
it may not have exploded as much as it did in real life. But
maybe not.
But the situation itself did actually happen.
Yes. So he goes out of his way. He still does these dubious things to ensure that he has an opportunity to gain his freedom permanently, substantially. But again, going back to that idea of the cost being too high. For Jeffrey, the cost was too high because, again, going back to my opening thoughts, Jeff isn't his job, so to speak. His identity is being a family man. It revolves around loving his kids and loving his family. And the character does speak to this a little bit at the end of the film. I do think this is where the voiceover narration is maybe a little bit too redundant. That might be my biggest criticism of the film.
That's
I
fair.
don't know how wholly necessary the narration is, because we understand why he makes the choice that he does at the end. We don't have to be told from Jeffrey himself why he makes that choice.
His performance is too good at giving us that already.
Absolutely. Because we do understand that the cost was too high. He did not want to be thousands and thousands miles away on a different continent somewhere where he could not be with his family or families at this point. Because he does consider himself to be a part of Lee's family. And he does become close to Lee. He does become close to her two daughters as well. And again, he already has a daughter and two sons of his own. So he would much rather go back to prison for, as we come to find out, 45 years plus another 320 months, whatever that math is.
Yeah.
And he would rather choose that and have the ability to interact with those two families, whether they come visit him or he can call them on the phone, which we see both of at the very end of this film. That's what he would rather have than freedom. He would rather be in prison and have communication with the people he loves than freedom. That, as an idea, I think is crystallized impeccably here. And it's certainly set up through the writing and storytelling here from Cianfrance, but of course it's Kirsten Dunst, it's Channing Tatum, it's their performances that also bring incredible credence to that idea. And I do think the emotional impact we get at the end of this film as it relates to that idea, astounding.
I want to ask you this too, and I know we're in spoiler-ish territory here, but I'll try to be a bit vague with how I describe some of these particular actions in the final act. But when Jeffrey makes that choice to ultimately stay behind, as you're talking about there, the way he chooses to stay behind, it involves a phone call with Lee about seeing each other on Christmas Day, right?
Yeah.
And he goes to visit. He has all these balloons and everything like that and goes to visit her. The way the movie is paced, it's very clear to the audience, at least, that you know something's about to happen. Do you think he also knows that, Jeffrey? Do you think he knows he's walking into a trap? Because I think he does. And I think that
so.
There's a little bit of ambiguity there, which I actually do appreciate. And it's maybe another reason why I agree with you that the voiceover narration is kind of unnecessary. In fact, it might actually make the ambiguity there a bit too literal if it was even going for any ambiguity there. But I like that he's almost playing a role in a way as if he's not sure if he's aware of someone being aware of his other life. but knows if I am walking into a trap, at least I get to stay in communication with these people.
Yeah.
But I think he secretly knows he's in for something.
I think so
He's
as
in for a
well.
rude awakening. Yeah.
Yeah. The whole time he's walking up the stairs, it's in the back of your mind that he's being set up, that he's going to open that door and the police are going to be inside.
But there's even still some trepidation from Channing Tatum in his performance there. You can sense that.
Absolutely. And even as he goes to open the door and realizes that it's locked, there's a little bit of surprise there. So you could certainly read it both ways. I do think that Tatum does a great job of allowing both of those interpretations to live, again, so to speak. But I think it's very much there. I think the film does a great job on its own terms of setting that up, that the narration, which undercuts that ambiguity to your point, and just states what we already know to be true, that either he knew he was going to be caught or that at the very least he wanted to say goodbye. That was very much in my mind as he's walking those stairs anyway. So I didn't need the voiceover narration. I think Tatum and Dunst do such a great job, which is what I love so much about that phone call sequence when he stops there on the side of the road, and it's so incredibly tender and emotional, because I do think that both of them, even though the camera only stays on Tatum, it's a stationary shot where we get this close up of him talking on the phone, and that emotion comes through wonderfully on Tatum. And huge credit to Kirsten Dunst, because even though we're only seeing her vocally, it comes through palpably on her end as well.
I think she gives one of the best performances of the year. I say that as someone that I wish I liked the movie a little bit more than I did. I wish I liked it as much as you did. That's probably our biggest disparity. But I also say that as someone who thinks Kirsten Dunst's work here is one of her best work ever. I think she is genuinely terrific in this movie.
I agree. I think her and Tatum both are excellent. Again, I think you can make the argument this is Tatum's best performance.
It's up there.
It might be for me.
Same with Kirsten Dunst. It's one of her best, I think, too. I put these two people in a romantic comedy together, or just some romance movie. I will absolutely be there to see it.
They're really good. And I do love that, again, not just the chemistry. I agree with you on the chemistry, but there's this innate awkwardness to it that the characters and the performances are also aware of, that they speak to at times, which makes it feel more organic to me, because every relationship has these awkward moments or tendencies.
It has a very small town kind of vibe to it. And I know this technically takes place outside of Charlotte, North Carolina, but it feels like it's in the middle of nowhere, North Carolina, which these feel like people that don't maybe intermingle with strangers all that often, which is probably why they're so awkward. So in a way, that awkwardness actually gives the movie a more established sense of place, which I thought was really effective too. So like that actually works in its favor.
I agree. I think all of that works wonderfully. If maybe I had to nitpick the film a little bit, is that some of the supporting characters, I don't always love Ben Mendelsohn here or Peter Dinklage, because their performances are heightened just enough that it somewhat contradicts where this film ultimately ends up as far as trying to find that middle ground. But they're supporting characters, so of course the film isn't going to give us the other side of that coin, so we only get the one side. We see both sides of the coin with Lee and Jeffrey, and even with the daughter characters as well. So I don't love the portrayal of Mitch and Ron, the Mendelsohn and Dinklage characters respectively, but as far as their place within the comedic backbone of the film, I think they're fine. They're perfectly fine in that regard. But to your point, as far as like the small town feel, as far as Tatum and Dunst is concerned, they absolutely get that part of it right. Yeah. And I also love that as well when you couple it with Jeffrey and some of the voiceover narration we do get here that I think is effective earlier in the movie when he's talking about loneliness and his place or his role as it relates to loneliness. Because again, this is a man whose identity revolves around his family, but because of the choices he makes, he's away from his family and he cannot go back to them. So he is in this hole of loneliness, going back to that void I mentioned earlier in my opening thoughts, that he fills with this makeshift family.
Yeah.
There's maybe a level of selfishness to that, but again,
Oh,
I
there
think there's
absolutely
a
is.
lot
Yeah.
of there. And again, we hear about that at the end of the film, because he does eventually hurt Lee and the two daughters once everything comes out. So it is selfish to a degree, but obviously he also genuinely cares.
Yeah, but sometimes selfishness does come from a genuine place. Like
Yes.
and this that is a moment of characterization where it is able to have its cake and eat it too, I think.
I agree. And I think Tatum is ridiculously good here at tapping into that duality.
Yeah.
It,
I will
it's
agree
fantastic.
I will agree with you that Ben Mendelsohn and Peter Dinklage are kind of giving caricature like performances. And if anything, that goes back to maybe where I would have actually liked to see more of a heightened zaniness that maybe would have allowed their performances to make more sense in a movie like this. And maybe I would have been less critical of that, because otherwise in this type of movie, their performances do feel a little out of place. I will say, if there's a moment in this movie where I feel like Derek Cianfrance is able to find a really great middle ground of how to balance that quirkiness with his traditional sensibilities, I think it's the singles dinner at Red Lobster. Like that moment there, I think the comedic energy and the dramatic energy are almost working in pure tandem with one another in beautiful ways. I actually think that might be, from a filmmaking standpoint, maybe my favorite scene in the movie, and a lot of that also comes down to Channing Tatum's charming persona and how the girls there all think he's gay. Just the way he comes. I think the way all of that works, it like that's a merriment that I thought was quite beautiful. And there are a few moments throughout the film where I think Sam Prince is able to get there. Maybe not as much for me, and that sounds like that's maybe our biggest disparity. But that one scene I did want to highlight that is very successful at doing all of those things.
Yeah, I think that's a great example of how you and I just see him differently as a
Yeah, I think
director,
so.
I think.
I think so.
Because I don't feel any sort of dramatic weight to that moment at all. I think it's a really fun comedic moment in the film for sure. And again, it leads to some awkward tension between Lee and Jeffrey, which again, I say very complimentary. The characters speak to it themselves. And as Jeffrey leaves, Lee even says that was really awkward. And so it's
yeah.
a fun little awkward moment that I think is effective here, but I don't sense any sort of dramatic sensibility there.
I sense a lot of loneliness in these characters simultaneously, and I think that's the dramatic edge that's counterbalancing the quirky edge. Like I actually see a lot. I see both working in tandem.
Yeah, I definitely didn't see it in that moment as much, perhaps from Lee a little bit, but again, I would mostly put that on Dunst and Tatum if that is there. I certainly wouldn't put that on Cianfrance at all. But where the dramatic stuff works for me, again, is the moment in the car when they're having the phone conversation, when Jeffrey has to make that call. Soon as he escapes, he makes the call back home, and his ex-wife tells him never to call back. And you get that incredible close-up there on Jeffrey. Or when he's talking to Steve on the phone, again, the Stanfield character, and he has to pass it off as if he's talking to some sort of sergeant because he's made up this lie that he works for the government. So there are real dramatic moments here that are quite on the other end of the extreme of the zaniness of the film. And that is how I often see Derek Cianfrance. When you look at his previous three movies, they're way more dramatically and emotionally hefty than a lot of what we get with this film. So that's how I see him as a director. And he does absolutely go to those places here, not quite as much in terms of the comedic backbone of the film, but I think that's why I love that it's not overly heightened, because those are not his strengths. But I do think the film is very funny. I think there's some great awkward humor throughout this film. I think the performances tap into the comedy in a great way. Maybe that's mostly the performances. I don't know. But I do love that it's not overly heightened, because that's certainly not him. But when the Derek Cianfrance does come through, when that emotional underbelly bursts through the seams in this film, I think the film earns the right to do that. And I think he finds that bridge tonally really well.
You make an interesting point. And while I've been sitting here, arguing that I think this movie maybe needed a little bit more visible zaniness to it. The moments in this movie that are more abrasively zany and going for that kind of comedy are actually the most unintentionally awkward scenes of the movie for me. One of them being when Jeffrey is caught by the Mitch character bathing at the Toys R Us. Like that scene did not work for me at all. Comedically, that just did not work. I found that painfully awkward. And then there's also another moment involving Juno Temple, who has a very weirdly brief role in this movie, where she's trying on wigs for, and it almost turns into like a Mrs. Doubtfire like moment. So I guess I'm contradicting myself a little bit, asking for a little bit more zaniness when these moments that are going for that zaniness don't work at all. So it's in this is why I guess I go back to saying I wonder how this material would have worked had it just been a different director that maybe had more of a understanding of how to balance that. And the stuff that Derek Cianfrance is very good at is still on display here when it needs to be. So I guess I don't know. I guess the moments where it is going for that heightened comedic energy are simultaneously the worst moments of the film for me. So I guess I can't have it both ways after all.
Yeah, and I don't necessarily disagree with that at all either. The moment when he is caught, that is an awkward moment, but maybe unintentionally works for the film because it is an awkward moment. He's naked, bathing in a store, and he gets caught by the store's manager. There's nothing natural about that. So
I guess it is. It felt like a scene that was trying to elicit laughter from the audience, and I actually did see this in a pretty crowded theater, which was kind of neat to see for a movie like this.
Same, yeah.
And there were moments where the audience did audibly chuckle and laugh. That scene was kind of dead silent, actually. I guess that's why I question it, because I felt like its goal was to do something that at least my audience didn't respond to.
Yeah, I'd be curious to maybe see how those scenes work on a rewatch, because I will admit, I do think they're awkward. I think both of those examples you bring up are awkward. I do question how much humor they were going for, particularly the one where he's caught naked. And the reason I say that, and maybe to your point as far as why the audience isn't laughing, is because the stakes are at their highest in that moment. He's been caught, and we know
That's a fair point.
that things are about to change drastically for him, where everything to that point, even though he's on the run, things have kind of come down. There didn't seem to be any sort of urgency anymore. He's out and about in the community. He's not hiding himself other than taking on a different name, but his face is still very much everywhere. So there was no sense of, okay, he could be caught at any moment. Like that had somewhat dissipated until all of a sudden at the Toys R Us, he's now caught, and he's naked.
So it's more interested in the tension than it is
in the
comedy,
tension than it is in the comedy. So I do kind of wonder if that's going on there. The wig moment, that excuse isn't really there anymore. So again, how much humor is the film going for there? If it is trying to play for laughs, I would agree. It doesn't get the belly laughs that some of the other moments get.
I think that's a good defense for the bathing scene in the store. But I do think, if anything, I'll stand by the criticism of the wig moment, because I think that one is going for laughs. I think in that case, that one probably does collapse on itself.
And that's fair. It didn't really bother me as much. It felt, I don't know if subtle is the right word, but it was awkward.
I think it was too muted, maybe, or something. I don't know.
Maybe. Yeah. It was a little, I would agree that wasn't the sharpest moment of the film, especially if comedy was the goal there, for sure.
Yeah.
Generally though, I think that tone is fairly well handled, especially for Cianfrance, who is not known for humor really at all. At least with his movies. I haven't seen the miniseries. Maybe the miniseries is tonally closer to this. I have no idea.
I don't think it is, but again, I haven't seen it, so I don't know for sure.
Yeah. When I'm watching Blue Valentine, I'm not sitting here going, you know what? I need a good laugh. That's why I'm going to watch
That's an enjoyable movie. It's a great
The
movie.
Place Beyond the Pines, hilarious. Like, that's just, no, like
Those are heavy movies.
very, very heavy movies. And I think that's what I love about him pulling the rug. He doesn't get too outside of himself. He does. There's no doubt about it. But I don't think he goes too far with it. And the performances certainly help with that a lot as well, which goes to great casting and collaboration. However this came together, the casting here was quite perfect.
The casting's amazing. Yeah, this is an example as to why best casting needs to be an award at the Oscars.
Yeah, exactly. 100%. Yeah, because the casting here is really, really good. And those performances, whatever the collaborative process was, as far as Channing Tatum and Kirsten Dunst working with Cianfrance to still make a diverting film, but again, maintain a lot of emotional empathy and humanity here for all of these characters. I think together they draw that bridge quite well. And I really liked it a lot.
Okay.
Yeah. Do you have any final thoughts on Roofman?
I will say this one thing I did appreciate about this movie. Well, first off, I will say we didn't really talk much about the period aesthetics. You know, not just the
90s.
Toys R Us of it all, but also the specific toys and video games that are referenced here. There's
Tickle
a gag.
Me Elmo.
I was gonna say Tickle Me Elmo. That's very heavily referenced in one particular scene. Of course, for those of us like you and I who grew up at that time, that's gonna hit our nostalgic funny bone. It's kind of a cheap shot in some ways, but it still ultimately does work. But the other thing about this movie I did appreciate is that it does have a pretty good attention to detail. So this is one of those situations that when you turn it into a movie like this, it could easily be ripe with plot holes. And you could probably peel this movie apart and find some, but the movie does a pretty darn good job trying to cover its tracks. So for instance, there's a moment where, not even a moment, there are a few moments rather, where the only thing that Jeffrey can eat at a Toys R Us, it's candy. You know, it's a bunch of M&Ms, all right? And I'm sitting there thinking, you know, if you're going to keep doing that, what's that going to do to your teeth? And also, the store manager is going to notice inventory missing. Well, they address those things. So they're actually aware of that.
That's a great point.
The film does a pretty good job trying to cover its tracks. And it might not cover every single track, but it does enough to at least get you to recognize that the movie is thinking about those things. In a way, it does add to the tension that at some point, Jeff has to make a mistake. Like he's going to forget about something. And that ultimately does happen, but I like the way it plays with those details to get to that point.
Yeah, that's a really great point. I love that you bring that up because to me, I think that just adds further credence to the humanistic complexities of this film and its central dualities, because we're told that much of his genius comes from observation. That's what he did in the army. That's what he excelled at in the military, was being a great observationist. And it's what leads to the success of his McDonald's robberies at the beginning of the film, and to his success in not getting caught while being at the Toys R Us. But he is human. He's not an AI robot, after all, it turns out.
He's not Ares. Because as we know, Ares doesn't get cavities, but a man like Jeffrey gets 14 cavities from only eating candy.
And inevitably, he's going to make a mistake, whether that's eating too much candy, whether it's stealing video games. That's partially how he pays for his adventures while with Lee and the kids. He is stealing from the toy store and then pawning that off to make cash. Eventually, the store is going to recognize that there's a disparity between money coming in and product going out. I do love that the film brings that up, and I do love that it gives Jeff another complexity that he has to deal with. And it also goes to serve that none of this was perfect. As much of a quote-unquote genius as he might have been in some ways, he was also human, and he was going to slip up eventually. And he did. He got too comfortable in the store at night. And eventually it did, it cost him in the end.
Yeah.
So again, like I just love that the film is willing to wrestle with those dualities. It wants to convey his humanity and his charming personality, the fact that he's this kid at heart, he loves kids, loves being with kids. All of that comes through. But also he makes a lot of dubious choices. And there are consequences to those choices. And the film doesn't shy away from that. It very much leans into that.
No, Channing Tatum, really good actor, and I like seeing him do more movies like this that still tap into that childlike quality that we like from him. Although at the same time, I would love to see if they could ever get a 23 Jump Street off the ground, because apparently, according to Channing Tatum, that script was genius. Wasn't that the one that was meant to like fuse with Men in Black or something like that?
Oh, I have no idea.
Did you hear about
funny,
that?
Though.
Yeah, apparently they were going to try and do a Jump Street / Men in Black like fusion movie or something like that, which if they were to get Tommy Lee Jones and Will Smith for that simultaneously, that might be the greatest movie ever made.
That would be wild. If they were able to pull
I gotta
that
look that
off.
up. I want to see if that was the case. I think they were gonna call it MIB 23 or something like that.
Was that the tweet where he called out, or in the interview he called out the producer like by name?
I don't think. Maybe that was it. Yeah, I know it was involved. Like he said, he did read the script or at least the potential idea for 23 Jump Street, and said it was brilliant. And he was talking about that recently, and maybe in those comments he did call out the producer.
I think
and why
so.
it ultimately failed.
I think he called out the producer by name, or maybe it was the article. I'm not sure, but the producer that was quote unquote being greedy about all of that was mentioned. I want to say he mentioned the person by name, which I think is hilarious if that's the case. I'm going to get the internet. I'm going to turn that guy into a bad guy for Twitter because if anything's going to turn this around, it's going to be that.
He start an army, right?
Yeah, that's how that works. That's how the internet works these days. So,
I'm looking that up. Apparently, there was this was an article from last year. Channing Tatum says unproduced 21 Jump Street crossover with Men in Black is still the best script he's ever read.
That would be hilarious. I would love to see that movie. Absolutely. I guess as we wind down here, I guess my just kind of last note, and this is, forgive me, maybe a little redundant and echoing things we said earlier, but just to emphasize what I love so much about the performances and the filmmaking here and how everything ultimately crystallizes, because we were talking about, that duality of him making these choices, but personality wise, he seems like someone you'd want to hang out with. This whole thing crystallizes at the end when he has to rob the Toys R Us that has been his home this whole time. Yeah. And again, how that duality comes through where he is forced to punch and knock out the security guard. And he takes the Dinklage character, who is the manager of the store, Mitch, takes him to the back, gets the money. And then as he's about to leave, the people that he had been rooting for this whole time, secretly, behind the scenes, are speaking out against him, calling him a bully, which he doesn't believe that he is. And so he's at these crossroads where he can leave. He can get away with all of this.
Yeah.
But he stops to call 911. How many thieves do you know that are stopping to call 911 on themselves as they're leaving the place they've robbed?
Not many.
There's not many doing that. But again, it's a moment the film earns through character building and storytelling. Yeah. That I think has an incredible payoff. And then, of course, you get that great moment between Jeffrey and Lee. Even though Jeffrey has the mask on, there's that great reverse shot, the close-up on Jeffrey, then the shot of Lee, who we, as the audience, recognize that she recognizes who that is. Yeah. Which is why, again, you don't need the voiceover narration because we understand that she knows.
Well, yeah.
That's how she knows.
This is a movie that demonstrates how performances ultimately succeed because of how successful they are with their eyes. So
Yes.
of course she's going to recognize this man by only seeing his eyes.
Yeah.
It's almost thematically fitting in that regard.
It's incredibly fitting. I agree. So like ultimately I have a few nitpicks here, but I love that. The stuff that works here way overcomes my nitpicks.
I will admit I didn't mind the voiceover at the beginning of the movie.
I agree. No.
Yeah, I didn't mind that.
I love the voice. Well, might be a strong word, but I don't mind the voiceover for the most part. It's really there at the end when it becomes redundant.
Yeah.
Like that moment when he's talking about loneliness as those fireworks go off, I actually think is quite effective in that part. So at times it very much does work. I just think at the end you don't need it because it spells out that ambiguity or that came through vividly in the performances that you don't have to overly do it there.
Yeah, I agree.
But I understand that you've created this structure where you have that voiceover throughout the film. So I get why it comes back, but maybe I wish they rewrote that a little bit.
At least to not make it feel like a spelling out of sorts like it does.
Yeah. Mostly I really like this film a lot though. I had a great time.
Yeah. I liked it too. Obviously you liked it more than I did, but it is a movie I know I can enjoy again. Like I could rewatch this one and still enjoy myself. Can't say that about other movies that I've seen this year, especially Tron Ares.
Yeah, there's
Never gonna watch
film
that
that we reviewed this week that I don't plan on watching very much ever again. That is for sure. All right. I think with that, we'll go ahead and wind down here. If you agree or disagree with anything we had to say, you can leave a comment below. If you're watching on YouTube, if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, hit us up on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Blue Sky. You can email us in sessionfilm@gmail.com. We did a review for Tron Ares. We ranted and had some not great things to say about that movie, but it was a fun conversation.
Great conversation for a not great movie.
It was cathartic.
Don't you hate when that happens? I mean, sometimes I do. So then I'm glad the movie exists to at least feel proud of a conversation that we had.
Yeah, I mean, it's not often that I get passionate in an angry way. I obviously come on this show, I rave a lot, much like with Roofman here. I had nothing but great things to say. I love the nuances of this film. I couldn't wait to talk about them. It was quite the opposite with Ares. I had my rant, and then I just felt like I had a loss for words. The film was so nuance-less and so dumb. Like I didn't know what else to say.
I love that you use that word. You rarely use that word.
I try not to.
And I try not to as well.
But it was.
It's not good, Bob.
Yeah, not good. At any rate, if you want to hear us talk more about that with the great Wonder Megan Laux, who we love, you can go and check that out. Episode 658 this week, we are talking about our top 5 performances from comedians. I very much look forward to getting into that as well. And on that show, I'm going to be talking about Indy from the film Good Boy, who I am campaigning for on the Oscars trail. So look out for me.
I feel like you won't be the only one.
Best actor, going to be campaigning that. I was the first, by the way. I mentioned this like a month and a half ago, before it was ever a thing.
You did wait. Well, because you brought up the comparison that maybe this could be this year's White God.
Yes.
And that's a movie that sadly no one's talking about anymore.
Yeah. If you follow us on TikTok, you have seen this clip. Or maybe even my Instagram. I put it out there. If you don't believe me, I have the TikTok
evidence.
clip.
I have
the evidence. I put this out like a month and a half ago. So I was the first. And I'm excited to get into that a little bit more as well. New Women in Session later on this week. New Chasing the Gold. Be on the lookout for both of those great shows as well. Dave and his writers always doing good work at InSessionFilm.com. So be on the lookout for that. Thanks for listening, everybody. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time on the In Session Film Podcast. Channing Tatum, Kirsten Dunst. Really good.
They're so great.